It was a Thursday in late June, the kind of New Mexico morning that promised nothing more dramatic than a bright blue sky and a slow rise of desert heat. In Ranchos de Taos, the light has a way of catching on everything. The adobe walls, the sagebrush, the distant ridge of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. It was under that same sunlight that 53-year-old Melissa Shirley Casias began what seemed like another ordinary day. She was a woman of quiet habits, steady routines, and deep family roots. She lived with her husband in a modest home just south of Taos, surrounded by the same high desert roads she had known for years. By every account, there was nothing about the morning of June 26, 2025, that suggested anything unusual. She woke early, dressed neatly, and drove her husband to work at Los Alamos National Laboratory, just as she had done countless times before. When she returned home, Melissa realized she had left her security badge behind. A small inconvenience, easily fixed. She stopped briefly at the local post office, then headed into town. Before noon, she made one more stop, the John Dunn Shops, a small, sun-washed cluster of local businesses in Taos where her daughter worked. She brought her lunch, exchanged a few light words, and smiled. It was a kind of simple, everyday moment that families overlook until later, when every detail becomes sacred. That brief visit will be the last confirmed time anyone spoke with her. By early afternoon, the heat shimmered over State Road 518, the highway winding south from Taos through Talpa and into the wooded slopes beyond. A few cars passed now and then, locals, delivery trucks, tourists heading toward the mountains. Around 2:15 p.m., a security camera captured Melissa walking along the roadside, moving steadily southbound. A witness, driving past in the same direction, later told investigators they saw a woman matching her description on the shoulder of the highway, walking with quiet purpose but without any visible distress. That was it. No struggle. No outcry. No car stopped beside her that anyone reported. In broad daylight, on a familiar road just miles from her home, Melissa Casias vanished. When she didn't return that evening, her family's unease set in quickly. Melissa was not someone who disappeared for hours without contact. She was reliable, grounded. Her husband and relatives began calling her phone. No answer. They drove the route she might have taken, stopping at roadside pull-offs, calling her name into the dry air. When they arrived home, dread deepened. Her wallet, phone, keys, and identification were still inside the house. Even her vehicle remained parked in the driveway. There was no sign of departure. No open suitcase, no written note, no trace of a plan to go anywhere. By nightfall, they contacted the New Mexico State Police. Within hours, an endangered missing person advisory went out across the region. Patrol cars traced the stretch of State Road 518 where she'd last been seen. Flashlights swept over ditches, fields, and culverts. Search teams assembled before dawn, joined by K-9 units and drones, mapping the rugged terrain south of Taos. And yet, no trace. The landscape of northern New Mexico is deceptive in its beauty. In daylight, it feels open, endless, watchful. But as the sun sets, the mesas grow silent, and the roads seem to dissolve into the hills. Even the most familiar places can feel alien when darkness arrives. That first night, under the same sky Melissa had walked beneath just hours before, her family and searchers fanned out along the roadside, calling her name again and again into the cooling air. Nothing, not a footprint, not a discarded item, not a single piece of evidence to explain why a healthy, grounded woman walking in broad daylight could simply cease to be. By morning, local radio stations carried her description. 5'4", brown hair, brown eyes, tattoos of a dragon, a dream catcher, and a bow and arrow. Volunteers began arriving with maps, flashlights, and drones. The Taos County Sheriff's Office and State Police coordinated search grids. The terrain was vast, arroyos, sagebrush, patches of forest where even a single person could vanish from sight in seconds. Family and friends took to social media, posting her photo again and again. Melissa smiling softly, her eyes calm, wearing turquoise jewelry that matched the clear sky she disappeared under. Within days, a Facebook page dedicated to her search had hundreds of members, and a GoFundMe campaign was launched to support the search effort. The community rallied, bringing water, food, and even offering horses and ATVs for terrain. Still, no leads came. The only enduring clue remained that final confirmed sighting. Melissa walking south on Highway 518, alone, calm, and vanishing into a heat haze horizon. In Taos. People began to talk quietly about it in coffee shops and gas stations. How someone could vanish without a trace just minutes from town. How daylight itself seemed to offer no protection. Theories surfaced but quickly died away, replaced by something quieter and heavier, a sense of fear and grief that lingered over the town. By the week's end, flyers appeared on storefronts and streetlights. They showed her face above bold black letters. Missing Melissa Shirley Casias. Below that, the phone number for the New Mexico State Police, 505-425-6771. A small line offered a $5,000 reward for information. Each day that passed without answers felt longer than the last. The family organized search parties into the foothills, along trails, and near the Taupo Ridge. Locals said the helicopters and the state police could be seen circling for miles, bright orange against the desert sun. But the land kept its silence. What unsettled everyone most was the timing. People vanished under the cover of night, in storms, in wilderness far from sight. But Melissa disappeared in broad daylight, on a road lined with homes, fences, and passing cars. Somewhere between one moment and the next, she was gone, leaving behind a community struggling to understand how a familiar world could swallow someone whole. Her husband spoke little publicly, but her relatives and children made repeated appeals through news outlets and social media. "We just want her home," her daughter told a local reporter. "This isn't like her. Someone, somewhere knows something." By the second week, the case had drawn statewide attention. Local outlets like KRQE News 13, KOB4, and the Taos News covered the story. Even People magazine published a summary of the disappearance, sharing the family's hope and fear with a national audience. Every headline asked the same haunting question. How can someone disappear on a sunny afternoon in a place where everyone knows your face? The days stretched into weeks, and still the highway held its secrets. Some nights, family and volunteers lit candles near the roadside where she was last seen. They prayed, hoping that somewhere, somehow, Melissa would find her way back home. The eerie stillness of her disappearance settled over Taos like dust. People kept searching, but the desert offered no answers, only silence, wind, and distance. And as July approached with no trace of Melissa found, the investigation deepened from a search into a mystery, one that would test not only the endurance of her family, but the faith of an entire town that believed such things couldn't happen here. The search that began in daylight would soon stretch into the long hours of night. Each new sweep of the terrain revealed only more emptiness. As the days turned into weeks, investigators began retracing every step of her final hours, trying to understand how, on a quiet New Mexico road, a familiar face could fade into nothing at all. The first 48 hours are the most critical. Every investigator knows it. Every family learns it too late. When Melissa Casias vanished on that clear June afternoon, the countdown began the moment her absence stretched into the night. At dawn on June 27th, 2025, the New Mexico high desert came alive with motion. Search teams forming at the edges of State Road 518, the line of cars extending from Ranchos de Taos toward Taupo. The road that had once been a quiet artery winding through sage and clay was now lined with officers, volunteers, and vehicles hauling water, drones, and supplies. The New Mexico State Police had taken command of the operation, joined by local deputies, firefighters, and the Taos Search and Rescue Team, a group accustomed to combing the mountains for lost hikers, not missing residents. Every detail mattered. The spot where Melissa was last seen on camera, the exact minute her figure disappeared from view, the direction of her walk, the angle of the sun. Investigators noted her stride, calm, deliberate, without hesitation, and marked the surrounding area on their maps. They found no footprints, no discarded clothing, no sign of struggle. The desert floor, hardened by heat and wind, had swallowed any trace of passage. In the early hours, search teams expanded their grid. They moved south from the road into open land, where sagebrush rose to knee height and the ground dipped into shallow arroyos. Drones swept overhead, their low hum following the pattern of the searchers below. From above, the land stretched endlessly, pale, cracked, and silent, broken only by the faint lines of fences and footpaths leading nowhere. Melissa's family stood by, watching as dozens of volunteers checked their equipment, tightened bootstraps, and set out across the heat shimmer. Her daughter clutched a flyer, the same image printed across the town now. Melissa smiling beneath bold black letters. "Somewhere out there, she's waiting for us," someone said quietly. The hope felt tangible at first. By midday, temperatures pushed past 90 degrees. The air thinned and shimmered over the highway. Volunteers fanned out in rows, their radios crackling with intermittent updates. Officers called out GPS coordinates, logging every direction of search, every fence line crossed. Dogs were brought in, trained K, 9 units accustomed to finding missing hikers or stranded travelers. They moved through the brush, noses low, handlers straining to keep pace. At intervals, they paused, lifted their heads, and kept moving. Nothing. No scent trail. No disturbance of the soil. No trace of a path leaving the road. To anyone watching, it was as if the land had simply erased her. As afternoon shadows grew long, helicopters from the state police began circling. Their blades chopped the air over the valley, scattering dust into sky. From above, officers could see the thin strip of highway winding through open desert, dotted with searchers like grains of salt against a vast brown plain. They saw nothing unusual. No tire marks, no broken brush, no flash of color that might hint at clothing or movement. The desert, under that light, looked endless and indifferent. By evening, exhaustion began to set in. Volunteers returned to the staging point, faces red from the sun, boots caked with dirt. They drank water, compared maps, rechecked coordinates, and looked toward the fading horizon. Melissa's family refused to leave. They stayed near the search perimeter until nightfall, their flashlights bobbing faintly in the growing dark. The air cooled fast. Coyotes cried somewhere in the distance. At 9 p.m., command called off the first day's ground search. The team would resume at sunrise. That night, as they packed up, one of the officers turned to a local volunteer and said, almost under his breath, "People don't just disappear in daylight." The volunteer nodded, staring out at the dark road. "Then where is she?" Over the next several days, the search widened. Teams explored the Talpa Ridge, the creek beds near Llano Quemado, and stretches of road leading south toward Penasco. Each area was marked off, mapped, and cleared. The police used thermal imaging drones at night, hoping to detect signs of movement or heat in hidden ravines. Nothing showed. On social media, the family's updates grew increasingly urgent. "Please keep sharing Melissa's photo." One post read, "She could be anywhere. We need everyone's eyes." The community responded in force. Taos residents organized nightly vigils, lighting candles near the John Dunn Shops and the roadside where she was last seen. Flyers spread through northern New Mexico, pinned to cafe windows, gas pumps, post office walls. People driving along Highway 518 began to slow instinctively, glancing toward the shoulder where her last image had been captured. The spot became a place of quiet pilgrimage, a patch of road transformed by absence. Reporters arrived soon after. KRQE News 13 and KOB4 ran segments featuring interviews with Melissa's family. "She's not someone who would leave," her daughter said softly, her voice steady but tired. "She's strong. She's loving. She's my mom. Someone knows what happened." By the following week, People magazine picked up the story, giving it national reach. The headline was simple, stark: "New Mexico Mother Vanishes in Broad Daylight." Readers across the country paused at the photo. The woman in turquoise, smiling under a desert sky. They read about how her phone, keys, and wallet had been left at home, and how her car sat untouched in the driveway. They read how police had found no trace of her after days of searching. And they wonder how, in 2025, a person could vanish without a single digital footprint. By the second week, the desert heat became unbearable. Search teams began their patrols before sunrise, moving through terrain already baked from the previous day. The scent dogs continued their sweeps. Nothing changed. Investigators revisited her home, retracing her final movements minute by minute. They examined her car, reviewed surveillance footage, re-interviewed witnesses, and analyzed her phone data, all consistent with what they already knew. She had left home on foot, walked along the road, and disappeared. No digital pings. No ATM activity. No phone usage after that morning. It was as though her presence had been cut cleanly from the map. The New Mexico State Police continue to treat the case as a missing and endangered person investigation. Publicly, they released only verified information. Last seen June 26, 2025, walking south on an M518 near Talpa, wearing turquoise and white shirt, jeans, white/pink tennis shoes. Approximately 5'4" tall, brown hair, brown eyes, multiple tattoos. Privately, officers work with federal databases, hoping to find a lead from vehicle cameras or interstate reports. Nothing matched. As days bled into weeks, the tone of the community shifted. Hope remained, but it carried a new edge, the quiet heaviness that comes when people begin to realize the limits of searching. Melissa's husband remained mostly out of the public eye, but her extended family continued to post updates, share sightings that proved false, and thank volunteers. Their words were filled with gratitude, even as uncertainty grew. On one post, her sister wrote, "We're not giving up. Melissa, if you can see this somehow, we're still looking. We love you." Beneath it, dozens of comments from strangers appeared. People from as far as Texas and Arizona offering prayers, offering to print flyers, offering hope. It became a thread that tied the community together, a shared belief that someone missing must still be somewhere. But with each sunset, the unanswered question deepened. How does someone vanish under the open sky? In full view of the world? There were no answers, only the echo of that question carried by the wind along Highway 518. As the second month began, the search teams grew smaller. The desert remained the same, silent, sunburned, endless. The flyers faded on telephone poles. The reward still stood at $5,000, but no one had come forward with anything solid. Melissa's absence became a presence of its own, a shadow over Taos, a reminder how fragile visibility could be. And though the official searches scaled back, her family's resolve did not. Because for them, Melissa wasn't just a name on a flyer or a photo in an article. She was a mother, a wife, a sister, someone whose life had filled the same roads that now felt haunted by her silence. The search had become more than a mission. It was a promise that until she was found, they would not let her story fade into the dust. As July turned into August and the desert grew hotter and quieter, investigators began to turn for the open land toward the finer details. The digital traces, the human patterns, the small inconsistencies that might hold meaning. For Melissa's family, each unanswered question became its own kind of echo, pulling them deeper into the mystery of how, under the relentless sun of New Mexico, someone could simply cease to be. By the time July bled into August, the landscape around Taos had begun to take on that strange, dry quiet that always comes amid summer, when even the wind seems to stop moving, and the air carries a shimmering weight. For the Casias family, every sunrise meant one thing: another day without answers, another morning without Melissa. The official searches had slowed, but the absence was louder than ever. Patrol vehicles still passed down State Road 518, sometimes pausing at the shoulder where she'd last been seen. Locals noticed the way the desert looked different now, as if the place itself remembered what had happened. Where most people saw sunlight and open road, her family saw only that haunting stretch of silence, a point on the map where a life simply disappeared. They refused to let it end there. Her daughter began each day posting new flyers, refreshing old ones curling in the sun. The family kept a base of operations at their home, a place where volunteers still came by with coffee, water, and questions. They talked about the terrain, the direction she'd walked, and what might have drawn her south that day. But each conversation circled back to the same blank wall. No footprints, no discarded items, no trace of struggle, just the sound of wind moving through sagebrush and the hollow echo of possibility. In those weeks, New Mexico State Police investigators began shifting focus from terrain to timeline. If Melissa had left on foot, perhaps some unseen pattern, an errand, a meeting, a small forgotten detail. might explain her movement. Detectives re-examined surveillance footage from homes and businesses along the route. They confirmed again what they already knew. At roughly 2:15 p.m., she appeared walking south along the shoulder of an M5-18 near Talpa, her turquoise shirt bright against the pale background. She was alone, calm, walking toward nothing visible. At 2:20 p.m., she vanished from the next camera's view. 5 minutes. That's all it took for the trail to end. Those 5 minutes became the center of the investigation, a gap suspended between what could be seen and what couldn't. Detectives replayed the footage again and again, looking for details. A passing truck, a shadow, a shape in the distance. Anything that might explain the gap. But each time, the same unanswered questions stare back. How can someone disappear in broad daylight with no trace of where they went next? As weeks passed, the media coverage widened. Local stations revisited the story, showing footage from search operations, volunteers scanning the desert with poles, dogs moving through brush, helicopters cutting across the sky. Reporters stood near the same stretch of highway, the sun glaring off the asphalt, and reminded viewers of the unresolved facts. Melissa left her home in Ranchos de Taos around mid-morning on June 26. She dropped off lunch for her daughter at the John Dunn Shops. Around 2:15 p.m., she was seen walking south on State Road 518. She never arrived anywhere. Her phone, wallet, keys, and car remained at home. That was the entire case, and the simplicity of it made it more chilling. In interviews, her family's voices grew steadier, more resolved. "We know something happened on that road," her sister said to KRQ News 13. "We just need someone to come forward." Anything, even the smallest detail, could mean something. Community members continued to search on weekends, focusing on areas the police had already cleared, unwilling to believe that nothing had been missed. Farmers opened their properties. Hikers scanned trails. Hunters checked remote arroyos and abandoned sheds. Still nothing. The desert was too large, too indifferent, and too quiet. At night, when the town settled into darkness, the family's house remained lit. A single porch light stayed on for her, a small signal against the black sky. Friends would stop by after work, dropping off food or simply sitting in silence. Sometimes they would drive that road together, headlights tracing the same route she had taken, eyes scanning the roadside. One evening, her daughter recorded a short message on social media. "We're still looking. We won't stop until we find you, Mom." The post spread fast. Hundreds of shares from strangers who had never met Melissa but were moved by the story. People began tagging missing person networks and community pages, connecting her disappearance to others across the Southwest. But Taos was different. Small, intimate. Everyone knew everyone. The idea that someone could vanish so close to home felt impossible. And yet it had happened. Investigators didn't close the case. The New Mexico State Police confirmed publicly that Melissa's disappearance remained an open and active investigation. Behind the scenes, they continued to review tips and digital data, even checking license plate readers in nearby towns. No relevant hits. Officers canvassed homes and spoke again to residents along State Road 518. Some remembered seeing a woman walking. Others were unsure of the exact day. A few recalled vehicles passing, a pickup truck, a sedan, a work van, but nothing out of the ordinary. There was no confirmed evidence that anyone had stopped or spoken to her. The absence of any sign was, in itself, the mystery. The Taos community began holding small prayer gatherings at the roadside site. Families brought candles, flowers, and hand-painted signs with her name. The first night they gathered, a line of cars pulled to the shoulder, headlights flickering across the desert. When they lit the candles, the light shimmered like a constellation against the dark earth. Her daughter spoke briefly, her voice carrying over the wind. "She's not gone. Not until we know. Please keep looking." That night, one of the volunteers said later, the desert seemed to hold its breath. The flicker of candles mirrored the stars above, the same sky Melissa had last walked beneath. Days turned into weeks. August came and went, but the hope did not. The flyers remained posted. The reward of $5,000 still stood. Local reporters kept revisiting the case, their voices softer now, more reflective than urgent. For those who searched, time began to blur. They measured days not by the calendar, but by distance covered. Another 3 miles of sagebrush, another arroyo cleared, another empty space crossed. And always the same result. Nothing for the investigators. That silence was its own kind of data. Cases like this often leave faint traces. A ping, a footprint, a call. But Melissa's case left none. Her phone remained at home, never turned on again. Her car sat untouched. There were no credit card transactions, no sightings at bus stations or airports. Statistically, the likelihood of a voluntary disappearance under those circumstances was almost non-existent. The case became one of those rare, unnerving puzzles that defied explanation, where every logical possibility led only to more questions. By September, the desert began to shift again. Monsoon rains brought a short-lived greenness to the hills, filling gullies and turning the air heavy with the scent of wet soil. For a few days, the dust settled, and the highway glistened under passing storms. But for Melissa's family, nothing changed. The rain only made the silence feel deeper. They began organizing smaller searches on their own, aided by volunteers who refused to let the case fade from memory. They called them check days. A few cars would line up early in the morning, heading toward different areas: dry creek beds, abandoned sheds, riverbanks. Each time they returned empty-handed. The silence grew heavier, but so did their resolve. Because every time someone said, "It's been months," her daughter answered, "then we're a few months closer to finding her." The story of Melissa Casias became part of Taos now, something whispered about in grocery store lines and mentioned in church bulletins. It was the kind of story that changed how people looked at the land around them. They started locking doors more often, watching the road more closely, checking in with family when someone was late. The disappearance had done what no storm, no fire, no tragedy could do. It made the people of Taos realize how fragile ordinary life could be. Somewhere between that quiet road and the infinite desert, a woman had vanished, and the echo of that truth still moved through every conversation, every prayer, every uneasy glance toward the mountains. The New Mexico State Police continue to urge anyone with information to contact them at 505-425-6771 or to leave anonymous tips through Crime Stoppers 505-843-STOP. As of this writing, there have been no confirmed sightings, no arrests, and no recovery. Melissa's family continues to hold on, their faith steady, their message unchanged. She's out there somewhere. And until we find her, we'll keep searching. As autumn approached and the days shortened, the investigation entered its most difficult stage. The quiet persistence after the noise fades, when the cameras leave but the family remains. In the months that followed, what lingered wasn't only the absence of answers, but the haunting realization that sometimes the truth hides not in what's found, but in what's missing. By the time autumn settled across northern New Mexico, the sun had shifted low enough in the sky to cast long shadows over the mesa. The air carried that dry chill that meant change, but for the Casias family, nothing changed at all. More than 3 months had passed since Melissa Casias vanished from the shoulder of State Road 518, and her absence had turned from shock into a kind of daily ache. The world around them kept moving, the hum of life continuing, but inside that small orbit of family, friends, and volunteers, time seemed to loop endlessly back to June 26th, the day everything stopped. That was the day Melissa, a 56-year-old woman known for her calm energy and gentle humor, walked down a familiar road under the open sky and never came back. In October, the New Mexico State Police issued a quiet update confirming what everyone already knew. The search remained active, though leads had grown thin. They reminded the public that the investigation was ongoing, and they were still collecting tips and reviewing evidence. But the press release offered no new developments, no breakthroughs, no fresh discoveries. Reporters noted that cadaver dogs had already been deployed in early searches, and that air and ground units had combed the surrounding desert multiple times, covering roughly a 5-mile radius from her last known location. The searches extended through arroyos, riverbeds, and rocky slopes where even locals rarely went. But each time, the teams returned empty-handed. Investigators later confirmed that no evidence of foul play had been found, but that did not rule it out. "It's still an open case," said one officer during an interview. We don't have reason to close it, but right now, we don't have direction either. And that was the weight that hung over Taos that fall, an absence of direction, of clarity, of closure. In a small living room lined with family photos, Melissa's daughter sat before a growing wall of maps and notes. Each pin marked a search route, a location checked, a lead followed. She had learned to read the desert like a second language, studying elevation maps, drainage patterns, and soil types. You start to see the landscape differently, she told a reporter from the Taos News. It's not just space anymore. It's where you're looking for someone you love. Neighbors continue to stop by with casseroles or questions. Most didn't know what to say anymore. Grief had shifted into something quieter, a long-term endurance. We just want her home, her sister said in late interviews. We want them to say goodbye properly, or better yet, not have to. Those words echoed through local churches and community centers. Prayer vigils continued monthly, candles lit beneath fading photographs of her smiling face. Some of the photos were sun-bleached now, corners curled from heat, but the message was still clear. Help find Melissa. During those months, the rumors began, the kind that always surface when time stretches too long without answers. Some whispered about the possibility of an accident. Maybe she had fallen into one of the desert's deep ravines, hidden from view. Others feared the darker possibility that someone had picked her up that afternoon, perhaps under the guise of offering help. Theories spread across online forums and local pages. Speculation layered over fact until even longtime residents couldn't separate the two. But what made the story so haunting was its stark simplicity. There was no storm that day, no sign of struggle, no reason for her to run. It was as if she had simply walked out of sight and dissolved into horizon. That image, Melissa walking calmly along the highway's shoulder, the blue of her shirt almost glowing against the tan desert, became the symbol of the case. Investigators released that detail repeatedly, hoping it would trigger someone's memory. You might not realize you saw something, one officer said on camera, but even a small observation, a vehicle stopped, a sound, someone walking the opposite direction, could matter. But the calls that came in were mostly repetitions of what was already known. A few claimed to have seen a woman walking that afternoon, but times conflicted and no sighting was confirmed. The case drifted in and out of the news cycle, resurfacing whenever another missing person story broke nearby. For the Casias family, that unpredictability was its own kind of torment, never knowing when Melissa's face would appear again on screens and posters, when they'd be reminded all over that the trail had gone cold. As winter approached, the temperature in Taos dropped sharply. Mornings were pale and still, the sky bleached to silver. The search teams began to thin out. The desert, once accessible, turned dangerous with frost and shifting ground. But Melissa's daughter refused to stop. She organized smaller, focused searches, 2 or 3 people at a time, scanning areas that had been missed. We can't just wait for answers, she said. We have to make our own progress. The family built a small memorial near the stretch of road where she was last seen, not a final resting place, but a beacon. A simple wooden cross marked her name, surrounded by white stones and desert flowers. Travelers passing through it sometimes slowed down, sensing the gravity of that spot without fully knowing the story behind it. One driver, a local rancher, later told Cookie News, "It's hard to pass that point now. You feel it. You look out your window, and it's like the land remembers." Through it all, the New Mexico State Police maintained that the case remained open and unsolved. They checked nearby rivers after seasonal runoff, coordinated with county sheriffs, and verified that no unidentified remains in neighboring counties matched Melissa's description. The system kept working quietly. Background checks, missing person databases, medical records, but nothing ever aligned. Every potential lead dissolved under scrutiny. It was by all accounts as if she had simply stepped into a place that doesn't exist on maps. The emotional gravity of the case began drawing national attention. Online forums dedicated to missing person cases started threads titled "The Disappearance of Melissa Casias, Vanished in Broad Daylight." People compared to other unsolved vanishings across the American Southwest. Cases that shared eerie similarities. Open landscapes, clear weather, no signs of distress, no witnesses. But those who knew her personally resisted turning her story into speculation or entertainment. They kept the tone grounded, factual, reverent. This wasn't a ghost story. It was a mother, a sister, a neighbor, a real person whose life had been interrupted without explanation. By late December, the lights of Taos glowed faintly against the snow-dusted mesa. The holidays came, but celebration fell hollow. The Casias home stayed quiet. A small tree lit in the corner beside stacks of unopened gifts. Her daughter posted a message online on Christmas Eve. It's been 6 months, and we still don't have answers. But we still have hope. If you see this, Mom, we love you. We'll never stop looking. The message gathered hundreds of comments from strangers offering prayers, volunteers promising to keep sharing her photo. Hope had become the one thing no one could take away. There's a particular kind of silence that lives in the desert, a stillness that can swallow sound, memory, even meaning. That was the silence Taos lived with now. The road where Melissa was last seen remained unchanged. The same curve, the same sagebrush, the same indifferent horizon. Only the people had changed. For them, every passing car, every gust of wind, every sound at dusk carried a weight of wondering. What happened that day? As the year turned, the family began to channel their grief into advocacy. They worked with local organizations to raise awareness for missing adults in rural areas, pressing for faster alert systems and community engagement. Her daughter, now the central voice of the movement, spoke with quiet resolve at town meetings. This isn't just about our family anymore. It's about making sure no one else disappears without help, without eyes watching, without people caring. The crowd listened. Some cried. Others nodded in agreement. Even in her absence, Melissa Casias had left a mark, a reminder that even the smallest act of awareness could save someone else. Still, the mystery lingered. No evidence, no closure, no goodbye, just a date, June 26, 2024, and a road that seemed to lead nowhere. Winter would pass, and the desert would bloom again. But for the Casias family, the coming spring would reopen the ache of time, marking nearly a year without answers. What followed wasn't just a continuation of an investigation, but the beginning of something deeper. The quiet resilience of those who refused to let her fade into silence. By the time the snow began to melt off the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, the high desert had returned to its muted palette. Dusty sage, pale sand, faint green where the light caught it right. But for the Casias family, the thaw brought no renewal, only the return of the same emptiness. 9 months had passed since Melissa Casias disappeared in broad daylight along State Road 518, and Taos had learned how to live with the silence. At first, her face had been everywhere. Posters stapled to telephone poles, flyers tucked under windshields, her name read on every local broadcast. But slowly, other stories replaced hers. The world didn't forget out of cruelty. It just moved on, as it always does. That's the quiet cruelty of a long unsolved disappearance. The moment when the crowd disperses, the cameras turn elsewhere, and the only people still searching are those who can't stop. And they didn't. The Casias home had become a sort of informal command post, though now the maps and markers had given way to notebooks, binders, and a corkboard lined with clippings. Melissa's daughter had learned to track search coverage, law enforcement updates, even geological maps of the surrounding terrain. She had built a system where none existed, driven by one unshakable truth. You can't vanish without leaving something behind, even if no one else could see it yet. Every week she called the New Mexico State Police for updates. The officers were kind, steady, but their voices carried the same weariness. They had checked again for new reports, unidentified remains, possible matches. But nothing new had come in. The case, they said gently, was open but inactive. That meant there were no leads left to follow, no fresh information to act on. It was a phrase that sounded like a door closing in slow motion. In March, the family organized another search, smaller this time, mostly close friends and volunteers. They retraced the same stretch of an M518, combing both sides of the highway, crawling through the dense thickets of sage and rock. The wind was strong that day, whipping dust into the air. A volunteer called that the noise of it made conversation impossible. It was just the sound of footsteps and the scrape of branches. They searched for anything, a piece of fabric, jewelry, a clue. But the desert gave nothing back. That night, as the group gathered near their vehicles, her daughter spoke softly. "I keep thinking," she said, "what if we've been walking right past her all this time? What if she's right here and we just can't see her?" The words hung in the air, heavy and unanswerable. The next week, a local journalist revisited the story for a one-year retrospective. He called it The Vanishing Point. The article opened with a sentence that struck everyone who read it. On a clear afternoon last June, a woman walked down a New Mexico highway and stepped into a mystery that still hasn't let go of Taos. The piece reassembled a known timeline. The drop-off at the John Dunn Shops, the sighting at 2:15 p.m., the disappearance minutes later. It included interviews with law enforcement, family, and volunteers. There were no revelations, no hidden twist, just a quiet reiteration of something that made no sense. A woman gone without trace, in daylight, on a road that never stops moving. What made the article powerful wasn't what it said, but what it left unsaid. That between the lines of every paragraph was the same unanswered question everyone in Taos had learned to live with. When the story aired on local television, it reignited attention briefly. New viewers, people from Santa Fe and Albuquerque, began sharing her photo again online. Tips trickled in, a few possible sightings, mostly mistaken identities. One woman reported a resemblance at a gas station off I-25. Another thought she saw her near Española. Police checked both. Neither led anywhere. The silence returned. But for Melissa's family, even false leads meant something. They meant people were still watching, still caring. "Even if it's nothing," her daughter said, "it reminds me she's still out there in people's minds." In April, the landscape began to bloom again. Desert wildflowers pressed through cracks in the earth, painting small patches of yellow and violet against the sand. The sight was beautiful and unbearable. It was the kind of season Melissa had loved most. Her friends remembered her tending to her small garden, her habit of collecting desert stones and pressing them into the soil like lucky charms. She found beauty in everything, her sister said during an interview that month, even in things other people overlooked. That's what makes all of this so cruel. She wouldn't have just walked away from the world like that. Those words became the family's quiet refrain. She wouldn't have just walked away. By May, nearly a year after her disappearance, the case had become one of those enduring New Mexico mysteries, the kind whispered about at diners and roadside stops, always prefaced by the same disbelief. How does someone vanish in broad daylight? There was something about that phrase, "in broad daylight," that carried both astonishment and unease. It's supposed to be the safest time, the most visible. But Melissa's story turned that comfort inside out. That month, her family planned a one-year remembrance walk along the same highway she had last traveled. Dozens gathered, walking together in silence for nearly 2 miles, their footsteps steady on the asphalt. Some carried signs, others candles in glass jars. When they reached the point where she was last seen, they stopped. The wind had died down that evening, and the desert was quiet except for the faint hum of traffic in the distance. Her daughter stepped forward, voice trembling as she spoke. "It's been a year, Mom. We still don't have answers, but we're still here. We're still walking with you." For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was a soft flicker of candlelight. Then, one by one, people began placing flowers at the roadside cross. The New Mexico State Police sent a representative that night. He didn't speak formally, but he stood with the family, a silent show of solidarity. Later, he told a reporter quietly, "We don't forget our missing. Sometimes it just takes time. We still hope to bring her home." That phrase, "bring her home," carried a kind of fragile hope that refused to die, even as logic began to fade. Over the following months, new leads continued to emerge, brief sparks that burned out just as quickly. An unverified tip claimed she might have been picked up by a passing vehicle. Another suggested she had walked further south than believed. Each was checked, documented, and closed. The investigation remained open. But open meant something different now. Not active, not forgotten, just suspended in time. For the Casias family, life had split into 2 timelines. Before June 26, 2024, and after. Her daughter began documenting their search on social media, not for attention, but for record. She posted updates, shared small memories, and spoke about the way grief changes shape over time. "It doesn't fade," she said. "It just becomes part of you, something you carry." The post drew hundreds of responses. People from across the Southwest shared stories of their own missing loved ones. Some wrote to say Melissa's story had inspired them to restart old searches. Others sent photos of candles they had lit in her name. Her disappearance had become more than a case. It was a reminder of vulnerability, of faith, of how easily the ordinary can fracture. By late summer, the FBI's National Missing Persons Database officially listed her case among unresolved adult disappearances in New Mexico. It joined hundreds of others, a sobering record of lives paused mid-sentence. Still, to those who knew her, Melissa was not a name on a list. She was a voice, a laugh, a presence that could not simply vanish into statistics. Her daughter said it best during an interview in August 2025. "They say time heals, but it doesn't heal what isn't finished. We're not looking for closure. We're looking for truth. That truth, however distant, remains the family's compass. The desert may have swallowed evidence. Time may have dulled public memory, but their search persists, quiet, methodical, unrelenting. Each drive down an M518 is both a journey and a vigil. They pass the same curve, the same shoulder, the same horizon where she was last seen, and every time they look, because somewhere between the known and the unseen, between the living and the lost, something happened that afternoon, and until that something is named, the search will not end. Now, more than a year later, Taos lives with a permanent question mark on its map, a reminder etched into the landscape itself. The final chapter is not about disappearance anymore, but what remains after, the endurance of love, the memory that refuses to die, and the haunting truth that even silence tells a story. The desert never forgets. It may seem still, the same endless sweep of sand and sage, but it remembers every footstep, every sound carried by the wind, every silence left behind. A year and several months after Melissa Casias vanished, the quiet stretch of State Road 518 near Ranchos de Taos had become something more than a road. It was a wound that never fully closed. To strangers passing through, it looked ordinary, a narrow ribbon of asphalt cutting through New Mexico's high desert. But to locals, it was sacred ground, the place where daylight had swallowed someone whole. In September 2025, as the anniversary passed again, the Casias family gathered near the weathered wooden cross that now stood permanently by the roadside. Wind had worn the paint thin, the desert sun bleaching the wood almost white, but the flowers at its base were always fresh. Someone, often quietly and without announcement, replaced them every week. That morning, the air was cool. The family stood together. Her daughter, her sister, and a handful of the volunteers who had searched every canyon, every arroyo, every stretch of brush in the weeks after she disappeared. They said her name out loud, not as a prayer this time, but as a declaration. Melissa Casias, alive in memory, unforgotten, still out there, somewhere. The ceremony was small, just a few words, some shared silence. A pastor from town spoke softly. There are mysteries that no human hand can untangle, but there are also bonds that not even time can break. Love endures, memory endures, and through that she endures. For a moment, the only sound was the rustle of wind moving through the sagebrush. Then, one by one, the family placed small turquoise stones at the foot of the cross, her favorite color. That blue had become the color of remembrance. It was what she'd worn the day she vanished, and it had become the hue of hope ever since. In the month that followed, Melissa's story continued to live on through community. Local residents began referring to that stretch of highway as Melissa's Mile. It wasn't official, of course, but everyone knew what it meant. Truckers would honk as they passed, small gestures of respect. Cyclists and hikers stopped to take photos of the memorial and share them online with messages like, "Still thinking of you, Melissa." Her family didn't ask for that kind of attention, but it mattered. It kept her name alive in a world where missing people too easily fade from public memory. Every share, every mention, her daughter said, It's like someone else is helping carry the weight. The New Mexico State Police continued to keep the case open. Every few months, detectives reviewed files, digital records, phone data, interviews, surveillance angles. They compared her case with other disappearances across the Southwest, looking for patterns. A detective who worked the search early on described the case as a clean cut in time, one moment visible, the next erased. He said it quietly, with the kind of tone used when someone admits they've been haunted by a case too long. Despite the odds, the department refused to close the file, because sometimes cases go cold, but they never freeze. Around that time, a filmmaker from Santa Fe contacted the family. He was producing a documentary about disappearances in the American desert, not sensationalized, but intimate, human. He wanted to include Melissa's story. At first, her daughter hesitated. She had seen too many stories turn tragedy into spectacle. But after meeting him, she realized his intent was different. He wanted to show how disappearance affects those left behind, the families who live every day in suspended grief. They agreed on one condition, that Melissa be portrayed not as a mystery, but as a person. When the short film premiered months later, audiences were silent by the end. The closing image, a shot of the highway under the orange glow of sunset, lingered for a long time before the credits rolled. It wasn't just the loss that stayed with people, but the love. Meanwhile, back in Taos, life had begun reshaping itself around absence. The family still kept Melissa's car in the driveway, washed, tires checked, always ready. Her garden had been replanted that spring, her daughter tending to it with quiet reverence. The wind chime she once hung near the back porch still swayed, the faint sound echoing through evenings when the desert cooled. "Sometimes I still expect her come walking up the road," her sister said. "Like she'll just appear again, the way she disappeared. No warning, no sound, just there." That strange duality, the knowledge that she was gone and the instinct that she might still come home, had become the rhythm of their days. In October, a new tip came in. A hiker reported finding what looked like fabric caught in brush several miles from the last known location. Investigators responded immediately. The area was remote, accessible only by dirt roads and rough terrain. They combed the site, collected the item, and sent it for testing. The results came back inconclusive. It was not linked to Melissa. Her daughter posted afterward. It wasn't her this time. But every search means someone still cares enough to look. That sentence captured the fragile balance between hope and heartbreak that defines every long-term search. Winter returned to Taos again, and a familiar stillness fell over the desert. The nights were long and sharp, stars cutting across the black sky like silver shards. But this time, the silence felt different, not hollow, but watchful. The family had learned to live with not knowing, to find purpose in remembrance. Her daughter began volunteering with missing persons advocacy groups, helping new families navigate what she once faced alone. She spoke softly but powerfully at one meeting. "We think of disappearance as something that happens to a person, but it happens to everyone who loves them. It takes the center out of your world, and you spend the rest of your life trying to fill that space with light." In that room, dozens of families nodded in silent understanding. As the second spring approached, a subtle peace began to settle over the Casias home. The grief didn't fade, it simply changed form, finding new ways to coexist with life. The family celebrated her birthday that May, placing candles in the sand by the roadside cross, letting the wind take the smoke upward. Her daughter said, "Even if we never get answers, I know she felt loved." And that's what I hold on to. The camera from the documentary team caught that moment. The flicker of flame against the desert dusk, the cross behind her, the road stretching endlessly toward the horizon. It became the closing frame of the film. Today, the disappearance of Melissa Casias remains one of northern New Mexico's most enduring unsolved cases. Law enforcement continues to investigate. The community continues to remember, and her family continues to hope. They drive that stretch of highway often, never stopping in the exact same place, but always slowing down just enough to glance toward the sagebrush, the faint shimmer of heat above the road, the horizon where she was last seen. They say the desert looks different now, not empty, but alive with echoes. The kind of place that holds its secrets, but never fully swallows them. And in that silence, there is still a promise, unspoken but felt, that one day someone will find what the wind and time have hidden. Until then, Melissa's story remains both mystery and memory. The reminder that even when the world stops asking, love keeps answering. Because sometimes the truest form of remembrance isn't in solving the disappearance, but in ensuring the person never truly disappears. If you travel through Ranchos de Taos, you might see the small white cross along the highway. There's no plaque, no inscription beyond her name, no sign explaining what happened there. But if you stop just for a moment, you'll feel it. The weight of silence, the hum of the desert, the road that remembers. And somewhere in that vast quiet, if you listen long enough, it almost feels as though she's still walking, steady, calm, moving toward the horizon beneath the New Mexico sun.